Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to lunch. So we're going to go ahead and get started, even though there's people in line, and introduce and begin our lunch keynote. I do want to let those who have registered tonight know, I do want to make it clear, if you haven't registered for the barbecue tonight, it is a ticketed event. That it is located at Ruby's in Bryce Canyon Overlook. So if you Google just Bryce Canyon Overlook, you're going to end up in the park, maybe not at the right location. So please just take a note, take a picture of the screen. It's a 4-minute drive from where we are now. Just to make, I don't want you to end up in the wrong place. Other than that, we don't have any other afternoon announcements, so we'll just go ahead and get started. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn it over to our keynote. Enjoy.
Great. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the lunch keynote. I hope you're having a wonderful lunch. Don't mind us while we talk to you about water resilience in the meantime. My name is Chelsea Benjamin. I'm a policy advisor at Western Resource Advocates. And I'm going to be moderating this session. I'll give you a little background on the subject of today's panel. We're going to be talking about SB 110, requirement to integrate a water element into the general plan. And then my three panelists that I have up here with me. We have Hailey Kirlin from the Division of Water Resources, an environmental scientist and planner. She'll be speaking about her experience helping communities implement the water element into their general plans under the SB 110 requirements. We have Megan Nick, sustainability analyst at Summit County. She will be speaking about Summit County's experience integrating 2 separate water elements into 2 separate general plans. And finally, Melinda Greenwood, a community development director at Kaysville City, who will be speaking about her community's experience integrating their water element into their general plan as well. So thanks for joining us today. And first, I'll kick it off with a little overview of Western Resource Advocates, where I work. If you haven't heard of it before, it is a nonprofit that works across the 7 Intermountain West states to protect our climate, land, air, and water. I focus particularly on water in my division and helping communities integrate their water and land use planning and increase municipal conservation in the region. My team particularly works with communities and the state legislature and putting out research and reports for Utah and Colorado. So I'm here to share some of that with you today. SB 110, you may or may not remember, it passed at the state legislature in 2022 and required cities and counties to include a water element in their general plan by December 31st of last year. So this panel is kind of like the check-in after that. What brought communities to the finish line and where do they go from here? SB 110 required communities to consider a water element in their general plan that looked at how to reduce water demand on existing and future properties, it required them to gather and work with their water providers to understand the water resources available in their communities and the state of them. And it also asked communities to look at ways to reduce water waste in their current operations. So in my line of work, we consider this a really great best practice for water-stressed communities to improve their resilience. And this initiative in Utah started in response to many years of intense drought. In 2021, 2022, there was this push by Governor Cox to look at different water conservation measures that would work really well for the state. He pushed to expand the turf buyback program, and the legislature responded with funding for that. Pushed for the statewide installation of secondary water meters, which can really help residents understand their water use and lower it. Agricultural optimization was a big focus. And then this last piece that I've highlighted here, integrating water and land use planning. And this has been a really big push across the West as communities are seeing just such extreme variability of their water supplies over time. They never really know what they'll get. And it's important for land use planning departments and water departments to come together at different phases of the development process and consider this from the get-go. And integrating water and land use planning can really help empower communities to improve water efficiency at their own direction. So not imposed by anyone else, but really working from the inside to figure out what works well for your community can help increase resilience to ongoing and future drought. We're just seeing it more and more, in particular this year. In Utah, there's been increasing support for helping communities integrate their water and land use planning. The Growing Water Smart program has been a big push. The state legislature has funded it 2 different times. It has put on 4 different workshops so far, with a 5th one coming up in June. And these workshops bring together groups of city and county teams, including land use planners, water planners, and elected officials, to talk about the state of water planning as it is now in your communities. And they set a 12-month action plan to get to where they would like to be with their water efficiency. And just some examples of different interventions along the development process of exactly what we're talking about when we mention integrating water and land use planning. There is the opportunity at the planning and policy-making phase to include water planning into the general plans, a la SB 110, which required that. You can incorporate water planning into capital improvement plans, and you can integrate land use planning into water efficiency plans, so it can go both ways. In the pre-development phase, there's the opportunity to think about water adequacy requirements for your community. What do developers need to show, or water providers need to show, about the water availability for these new developments before you say yes to them? There's also the opportunity to set conservation-oriented tap fees. This is usually done by setting water connection development charges, system development charges, lots of different names for this, but it's the fee that a developer pays to connect water to their new development. There's the opportunity to right-size that based on the water use of each development and have them pay accordingly, rather than having them pay too much or too little to connect to the water system. And that can incentivize water efficiency based on those rates. In the development review process, there's the opportunity to integrate water into zoning and subdivision regulations, into annexation policies, planned development policies, and process incentives. In the building and construction phase, building and plumbing codes can incorporate water efficiency into them, or can consider more stringent codes for that. And also the opportunity to integrate water efficiency into landscape regulations, which has really been a big push in the face of increasing drought in the state over the past few years. In the post-occupancy phase, you can look at water conservation or rate structuring. The more you can set different tiers of water use, and if residents go over a certain baseline, a certain sort of reasonable use tier, then you can start charging them based on how much they're using above that. You can offer conservation incentives and education, like turf replacement rebates, and workshops on water-wise landscaping. Outdoor watering restrictions are a tool you have in your tool belt. They can really come in handy during a drought with a lower water supply. And water budgets. Water budgets come in many different forms. You can set them per lot, say your use should be about this much water and please keep inside of that. It can apply to a landscape, so only requiring a certain amount of water on the landscape, which influences the type of plant material that goes into those landscapes, and many other different ways of doing it. And then finally, water audits can be offered to residents to look at their irrigation systems and make sure that they're running optimal for their existing landscapes. And I'd like to highlight, because we have Megan here from Summit County today, my organization worked with Summit County as part of the Growing Water Smart alumni technical assistance program. We gave them 100 hours of pro bono technical assistance to support drafting the 2 water elements for their Snyderville Basin and Eastern Summit general plans. And this was a really great project. Megan will dive more into it, and we're looking forward to helping them now implement parts of what they set out in their water element and their general plan, like their efficient landscaping code. I'll highlight 2 resources that were really helpful for me when helping them with their water element in their general plan. The Division of Water Resources has a great website that essentially laid out everything cities and counties needed to know to implement SB 110. They had checklists, they had great resources and ways that just explained what it all meant. That was a really great resource for me, and this guide that I have up on the screen from the Babbitt Center, which gives some great on-the-ground examples of water elements across the West. And I was able to take the checklist from DWRE and compare it with what could be added to it based on other examples around the West. And lastly, from my portion, I'll just highlight some great resources if you're new to thinking about water and land use planning integration. WRA, we have a great, very weighty guidebook on how to do this in your local community. Lots of great options for tailoring it to your local needs. And there's 2 great guidebooks from the Utah Growing Water Smart program. The last 2 workshops in the state took place here in southwestern Utah and in northern Utah, and there are associated guidebooks with those. So if you're looking for some great examples tailored to exactly where your community is in the state, those are some great resources as well. Thank you for your attention, and I will turn it over to Hailey.
Thanks, Chelsea. Yeah, I think that's good. Thank you. My name is Hailey Kirlin, and I work for the Division of Water Resources. The Division of Water Resources, along with the Department of Agriculture and Food and the Division of Drinking Water, was tasked in 2022 to help support cities and counties as they updated their general plans with the water use and preservation element. And we did that in a variety of forms. There was a lot of coordination, and there was also a technical assistance grant program that we provided cities and counties. So today I want to describe and provide analysis of 62 general plans, water elements that we received after the December 31st deadline of this program. And I'm hoping to showcase some statistics on common elements across the 4 main legislative components. We received 88% of required city plans and 62% of county plans. So thank you so much for sending this to me. Diving right in, the first legislative requirement surrounded developing a water budget. And we saw that across the state in these 62 plans, planners created various analyses of water supply, demand projections, and acquisition planning. As you can see in kind of this top row of boxes, 87% in these 62 plans, planners projected growth and water demand based off of population trends and broad municipal and industrial water use. While 37% dug a little bit deeper and showcased water budgets that were disaggregated by diverse land use categories or equivalent residential units. In this section, something really interesting popped out at us, which was the fact that in these 62 plans that we reviewed, 71% indicated that their city or county needed to acquire water for future growth. So I wanted to ask the question, would your plans change if you knew that neighboring cities and counties were also planning to acquire additional wet water to support their growth? And I think it's important for us as a planning community to start really thinking about these harder questions, because scenario planning is really important in the water world, and I think we're heading towards an increased scenario planning world. Diving back into the requirements, The effect of permitted development or patterns of development on water demand were proposed land use zoning code or administrative changes for the most part. Infrastructure pressures were also described in these plans, followed by water availability assessments, non-potable reuse, as well as required demonstration of water supply for new development. The second and third requirements for this legislation required cities and counties to showcase methods of reducing water demand for existing and future development. And preceding this section, our team saw something really cool, which was that cities and counties across the state are really in tune with regional conservation goals in their local watershed. 93% of these plans discussed regional conservation goals, and 74% including some sort of water-based planning or source protection. And so we think that this serves as a foundational standard for city and county water planning, and was really interesting. In terms of the actual methods we saw for reducing water demand, we saw it on kind of showcased on a spectrum. So on one side we have existing development, and on the other side future development. So for existing, leak detection, rebates, incentive retrofits were discussed. Kind of in the middle of the spectrum of benefits both existing and future development water reduction is public education or outreach and water efficiency standards. And then in order to reduce water demand for future development, landscape ordinance and new development was discussed the most. The fourth and final main legislative requirement involved water preservation efforts for city and county operations. And in this section, cities and counties were very aligned. Water provider coordination, water monitoring, reporting, or performance tracking, and city or county landscape water reduction were discussed across most of the plans. But customer water use feedback tools and drought contingencies were also discussed. You guys were very aligned in your planning in this section. So what is next for this interagency group and water and land planning? Our team believes that data from secondary metering will better inform water budgets. So sometime after 2030, when secondary metering comes online, we expect plan updates might be up for discussion. In terms of ongoing coordination and education, a water use and preservation program report that will showcase some of these statistics, hopefully add on to it, will be completed in summer 2026. In this report, I'm hoping to showcase some policy and education recommendations based off of the commonalities we saw in all these plans. The Division of Water Resources also hosts the watershed councils as well as growing water smart workshops. Local watershed councils, if you don't know, there's 12 of them, and they're kind of, they're stakeholder-run councils that discuss water topics that span across their entire watershed. And right now, they're not incredibly active with cities and counties, but want to be. So I'm hoping to kind of coordinate activity between cities and counties and the watershed councils, so you might hear from me in the future about that. As Chelsea talked a little bit about the Growing Water Smart workshops, those are, we have funding for those, and those will occur. If you're interested in being a part of that program, please come talk to me. And as always, talk to me, come find me after this. We're open to review any plans, collaborate or facilitate meetings regarding water and land use. And as your general plan water elements are implemented or water use shifts, contact us if you have any issue or need to amend your plans. We would love to help you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Chelsea and Hailey, for introducing the water element. As Chelsea mentioned, my name is Megan. I am the sustainability analyst for Summit County. So in Summit County, we have a sustainability division of 2 people under our health department, which is pretty unique, but We work a lot with our community development department on projects such as the water element. So just to give some context to Summit County, as Chelsea also mentioned, we have 2 planning districts, which meant 2 water elements we had to draft. So we have the Snyderville Basin, which is much more consolidated, populated, as you can see by having 6 public water providers compared to Eastern Summit County, which is much more rural, ag-focused, and a little more fragmented in terms of their water infrastructure. They have 24 public water providers serving anywhere from 2 to over 700 connections. So pretty big differences between the Basin and Eastern, which means we had some different considerations for both water elements. Snyderville Basin, we've also had water concurrency since 2016, and we do not have water concurrency currently for the eastern side. And then just to also note here, a similarity between both planning districts was the water provider data that we gathered for the water elements. It kind of made it clear that our water providers on both sides have similar supply and demand with their current infrastructure and system capacity. So really, from a planning perspective, want to understand that moving forward with how we responsibly manage growth. And as not a water provider, the county does understand that although we can't have direct influence over with certain policies and infrastructure, we are seated at the headwaters of 4 major rivers, 2 of which go to the Great Salt Lake. So the way that we manage these state resources will directly impact downstream communities and the Great Salt Lake. So with the water element requirements, we had some challenges, as I can guess, with many cities and counties in the room who have done the plan. We don't have a lot of staff capacity, especially for water. We don't have a main water staff, a main individual for water on staff, or a water department fully dedicated to water. So we were very grateful to Western Resource Advocates because they were able to help us dive deeper on these requirements. We also had some lack of available data, especially with our smaller water providers on the east side. And then we also have a ton of private wells, which was also really hard to get clear data from. Some of the outreach requirements through the water element were really challenging. For example, doing outreach to all of our irrigation and canal companies. So this figure on the slide in green, that's all irrigated land just on one portion of the eastern side. So we have over 70 listed irrigation and canal companies in the county, and we did not have updated contact information for all of those. So outreach was pretty difficult, and we also realized that moving forward, that's a pretty basic starting point, that we could just have contact information for all of those companies. So when we do want to do outreach in the future and talk about more innovative solutions, we can actually get in contact with them. And then lastly, so our Snyderville Basin water concurrency is through our health code. And in 2022, there was some state legislation that restricted health departments from having water concurrency through our health code. So that was something we had to consider because even though the water element requirements suggested adopting water concurrency, we can no longer do that through our health code. So we had to discuss internally what that would look like if it was through a different code in a different department and the challenges that would come with that. So some of the key takeaways through drafting the water element is that, again, although the county is not a water provider, we can play an active role in how we manage our resources and what future water security looks like. And so emphasizing conservation and efficiency and coordinated efforts in terms of land use decisions and how that will impact, and also how that will influence and then be impacted by multi-year drought conditions moving forward. This process also highlighted a lot of the existing work that's happening in our county that we were maybe not aware of, or different departments were working with, but across departments we weren't aware of. And so moving forward, it would be more effective for us to continue to support that work rather than duplicate it or unintentionally take resources away by trying to do some of our own initiatives. So something to keep in mind. Some of the concerns that we have coming away from this process, like I mentioned, current infrastructure and system capacity are pretty much at their limit across the county. And so what does that look like for our projected growth? And how can we really partner with water providers to ensure that we continue to have access to safe water drinking resources moving forward? As I touched on earlier, we have a significant number of private wells in the county, and that becomes a public health concern through drought conditions in terms of the intersection between water quantity and water quality. And so for our public health department, something we highlighted is that moving forward, our health department will need to do some more coordinated outreach and education for our private wells to make sure that everyone is aware of the risks as we experience more drought. And then also trying to find that fine line between adequately educating our public but not scaring them. That is a fine line that we have to walk, but we do have recent examples of water trucking and building moratoriums that can scare people, but also make the risk real and recognize that we have to have conservation and efficiency from the household level all the way up to the county and regional level, and that it's important for all of us to be engaged in this work. Some of the opportunities and the positive takeaways from this is that the water element provided us a path forward. So this was really the first time that the county took a comprehensive look at water across the board, so basin and eastern side. And so this really helps our departments acknowledge that we have a role to play. We need to be more coordinated, both internally and externally with partners. And then also supporting more cohesion between water providers and their messaging. So one piece of feedback that we heard a few different times is it can be really challenging for community members who are in one city that has advisories and restrictions, and then the neighboring city has no drought messaging at all. And that can really undermine regional conservation efforts and programming. And so how can we, as the county, play more of a role in connecting water providers and making sure we're providing consistent messaging to all our community members? And then again, I highlighted a big takeaway was all the work that's already happening in our county and that we really want to support that moving forward. So just added on this slide a few key partners that we'll continue to work with. So our USU Extension offices, Weaver Basin Water Conservancy District, and then kind of a unique partnership that came from this was myself from the Sustainability Division and one of my planning colleagues. We went to both of our soil conservation districts and got to hear from them from the ag side of what they really want to see, the support they need, and the work that they want to do prioritize moving forward. So for next steps, we are starting to work on prioritizing. Our chapters are pretty lengthy. We have a lot that we want to do and know that we can't get it done all at once. So we're trying to prioritize within our county department. So our county lands and natural resources department, community development, sustainability, and public works. What does this look like moving forward based on impact, community needs, and anticipated legislation? So an example of anticipated legislation was this past legislative session, there was HB 400, which was proposing landscape requirements. And so that kind of came up to the top for priorities. And luckily, moving forward, we're going to be working with Western Resource Advocates. So although that legislation didn't pass, we will now hopefully be adopting water-wise landscaping ordinance on our east side, and then also identifying improvements for our basin side. We also found that having more coordination externally and having more conversations with people who are working with this issue day in, day out would be really important. So establishing a conservation committee, not with just government partners, but also our water providers and some of the other educational programming happening. And then we are also currently updating all of our general our both general plans this year, so we may identify some tweaks and improvements that we want to make to the water element, and that'll be something we will want to continue to do, and hopefully that will mean bringing on a full-time water staff individual in the future. And yeah, I'll pass it off to Melinda.
Well, it's nice to be in front of a room full of people that aren't going to spend 3 minutes with angry comments about a rezone. So I wanted to just give a little bit of information to you all about Kaysville City. We are located in Davis County. We're 11 square miles. Our population is just over 33,000 people. We distribute culinary water. We don't produce any water. We don't have springs or wells. We wholesale all the water from that we purchase from Weaver Basin and deliver that to our residents and businesses. So we don't provide secondary water. Our water usage just for indoor culinary water in 2024 was 2,258 acre feet. 95% of our water connections are residential, and that we have almost 9,000 water connections. The other remaining 5% are commercial connections. We do allow commercial properties to use culinary water for irrigation. 80% of our water usage is outdoors, and that is, I think, one of the things that's very interesting about water conservation. Kaysville tends to have a lot of large half-acre, quarter, or even third-acre lots. There's a lot of water that gets used when those yards are being watered. I wanted to speak just a little bit about opportunities and challenges that, as we went through this plan, one of those, if you're not aware, if you live in a community that, or work in a community that provides water, the State Division of Drinking Water requires a water conservation plan to be submitted to them every 5 years. And our Public Works Department, our Public Works Director had been working on the water conservation plan with the state for the drinking water. So it was well timed that we were kind of going in tandem with that plan that also had to go before the council and be adopted. We got a grant from the state for $15,000 to assist with the costs. You know, one of the things that's, I'm sure each of you understands very well the challenges that comes when the state hands down these mandates. Here's what you have to do, here's the timeline, and most of the time they don't provide any resources or funding. We're just left on our own for those unfunded mandates. So it was nice, at least in this instance, that there was an opportunity to have some financial support, but also the support from the Division of Water Resources with Hailey and her group. Another thing that we went back and forth on initially, I thought we would do not a lot of public involvement, but some public involvement. As we got a little bit more into looking at the plan and discussing the requirements and just how much developable land is left in Kaysville, which we have maybe about 300 acres, not a whole lot left. And we decided that our time would better be spent maybe educating our elected officials and planning commission members instead of the public. So we ended up really just having some joint workshops with the Planning Commission and City Council. Of course, the public was invited to those, but we didn't end up doing a whole lot of outreach and public comments for the plan. Another big struggle, and I'll say one of the things that I really enjoy the most about working in government is that there's really no proprietary or private information. So we do tend to look to our other communities, our, counties, big brother, big sister cities to say, hey, what have you done? What worked for you? But because this was so new, there really were no other examples to turn to. And that was a struggle because, especially for me, visualizing something is very helpful. So it was a challenge to not have 5 or 6 or however many plans to go look at and say, hey, this portion might work here in Kaysville, but this community has this, and that doesn't necessarily fit. We tend to go look at all those plans and kind of pull in what works for us, and we just really didn't have the opportunity. The other thing too is, we only control the culinary water. Megan also mentioned that there was limited data. We had that same issue. Our secondary water providers don't have meters set up. They would have a master meter, right? Like they know how much water they receive and how much water they deliver. But it was further complicated, this map that shows our 3 different water or secondary water provider in Kaysville. We have Davis and Weber, Hates Creek, and Benchland. Kaysville City property boundaries are in black, right? And it shows that all 3 of those secondary water providers have districts that go outside of the city boundaries. So we couldn't even take the data of this is how much a master meter and back that into this is how much is being used specifically in Kaysville, because some of that was in Fruit Heights, some of that was in Layton or unincorporated county. So that was a challenge to try and figure that out. And then another challenge was this is a lot of technical information. I found myself Googling a few times, like, what is a KGAL? That's 1,000, they're speaking in terms of 1,000 gallons. Anyway, so a lot of this was technical, and we did have, we brought in our engineering firm that consults with us for all of our water needs and does our watering modeling, and they had to do a lot of work with that too. And I appreciated as the process went on, it was a great collaboration between the state, our secondary water providers, Weber Basin, and then our Public Works Department. So we ended up really just kind of trying to figure out, with a lack of data, what do we put in our plan that could be meaningful? And we really just came back to a point where, without that data and that information to really set up what this means for Kaysville, we wanted to be really cautious with what types of goals we set. And we were and are set with water probably really through like 2050, 2060. We have a lot of culinary water rights through Weber Basin, so that really wasn't a concern. But in the end, we just really felt like those goals and objectives, we need to focus on getting the data and then working together collaboratively. So when we do amend our general plan in 27 or 28, whenever we do that, we should have more data, and then I think we can improve on some of these goals and objectives. But align future land use with sustainable water demand. I would hope that's something that we were all doing. It is very important to make sure that you don't overdevelop your water. I worked in Pleasant View City in the 2012 to 2017. I think it was my second year that I was there, and I was the city administrator. And our contract engineering firm came to us and told us, like, you guys have overdeveloped your water. We didn't have sophisticated SCADA for our water system. And we had overdeveloped the water to the tune of, I think, about 300 homes. And if all of those homes had come and pulled a permit at the same time, we would have been in trouble. We did work with the Division of Drinking Water to try and figure out, like, what do we need to do? What can we do here? And we ended up putting in place what we called an adequate public facilities ordinance. So I can tell you from personal experience, and especially being the city administrator of a community, that it's like, holy crap, we could run out of water. That's really scary. And so I do think that this bill that the legislature passed, I think this is important. It really is critical that we take these types of things into consideration. And so as we go forward, right, we will continue to work with our other secondary water providers and get that data, and then we can refine those goals in the future. Another interesting outcome, if you look at in chapter 6 of our general plan, is where we put the water element. But we came up with this tool, and I should also say, we were working on a small area plan with GSBS, They've been fantastic to work with, and based on that, we asked them to help us with our water plan. So it was nice timing with that too, because I already had a consultant on board, and I could just work with the one consultant rather than having another group to come in. But we created this tool collaboratively with all parties, and the intent of this tool was to kind of say, look, in Kaysville, at least for culinary water, this is how much we know is being used based on the type of zone, right? So light agricultural has, 2,000 gallons of water use per day, and so on and so on. And so the intent was that we would have this table and use this as a tool that any rezone that comes in, we just kind of plug in numbers, and then we can look and say, do we have enough water capacity to serve or not? Well, the first rezone application we got after this, actually I'm going to go to this next slide, but it was a blend. It was R16 for 6,000 square foot lots, but it was actually a blend of smaller lots and lots as big as 22,000 square feet. And so this table really didn't work. So we had to kind of work around that and figure out then just how to convert numbers that wasn't based on just the zoning, because those lot sizes were so varied. One of the things that I feel strongly about is communicating well with the public through our staff reports. And of course, that's for our planning commissioners and our city council members as well. So this is a section of a staff report that I presented in January on a rezone. That rezone was Symphony Homes. And I wanted to just put in there, and a lot of times when we do get comments on rezones, citizens are saying, our roads can't handle this traffic, and we don't have enough water, and the schools will be crowded. And so the staff report really is a tool to help inform and educate the public. So especially since this was the first staff report where we were utilizing this chapter of the general plan, I wanted to go a little bit heavier on some of the narrative and data. But at the end, and I worked with, because we couldn't use that table to just convert things because of those varied lot sizes, I worked with our city engineer. I made sure he double-checked my math, that this table here that just shows, like, this is how much water we have contracted, this is, our 5 use water average, and this is how much acre feet, 12 acre feet, we anticipate this development would consume. And then the delta between all of that is we have plenty of remaining capacity. And then, of course, the main takeaway from that is we have adequate culinary water supply for this rezone application. I may or may not be a pro, but I'm always again, one of the greatest things about working with you all, with government, is that we really do have an opportunity to help each other. So timing on this, again, it was, what I wanted to share with this is I ended up with, really we were on the very last meeting date of the year to get this adopted before the end of 2025. And the grant required that we adopt it by the end of 2025. It was, our council wanted an additional work session to better understand the information. And so that really did push the timing right to the very end. And I can tell you, I know my council didn't appreciate being painted into a corner of like, we really have to adopt this tonight or not. But there was always a workaround with that. And so one of those pieces of advice to you would be, don't wait to the last minute. Like I did, and it didn't intend to do that way, but it's just kind of how things work sometimes. Staffing and resources was a challenge, but again, we had some benefits of timing with the work that our public works director was doing on the conservation plan. We already had a consultant on board. And again, looking at that, how do you have a workaround? Well, the tool didn't work the way you anticipated it. It will on other rezones. And then just keep on adapting and learning. One of the things too that has been a struggle with, I think, political will, we did put in place a few years ago a very mild water-wise landscaping ordinance. The council really was hesitant on putting something in place They just don't want to tell people what to do with their properties. And I think that sentiment will start changing, right? This is going to be probably the hardest year any of us has seen with water availability, and that probably will assist with having those sentiments of not wanting to be kind of the bad guy and putting regulations in place. I think that will start shifting. But relationships are really important. And so we do have really good working relationships between my department, our public works and engineering staff, same with Weber Basin, with Benchland, Hates Creek, and all of our secondary water providers. So keeping those relationships in good status, it will be important as we go forward and implement this portion of the general plan. This is just my contact information. You guys can find me in Kaysville if you have any questions. And with that, we're going to go into a panel.
Awesome. Thank you for your continued attention. I know lunchtime can be a tricky time to stay awake, and you all are doing magnificently. Thank you. And so we'll go now into a little bit of discussion on our end, and then hopefully have a little bit of time to ask you if you've been involved in this process at all, if you have anything to share as well. So my first question is for my panel here. Melinda and Megan, how do you envision the water elements in your communities guiding your future growth?
Well, I just kind of showed you, right, how we're going to, I guess, address this through our staff reports. But really the goal is to just have a conversation internally. How does this particular development impact what is available? And candidly, one of the biggest challenges we're going to have with some of the remaining acreage to be developed in Kaysville is the secondary water availability and getting it to those areas. So that'll be a challenge because we don't oversee that. But, you know, the primary focus for us then is that culinary water to ensure. So I think we're just going to roll into our staff reports looking at the type of development, what the impacts will be, and how much water availability that we have.
I feel like I've used the word coordination a lot today, but yeah, it all starts with coordination, who we're talking to internally, but also externally. So making sure our community development department, our natural resources department are talking to each other when reviewing applications, but then also externally with our municipalities, the conservancy districts, but also our conservation districts. And really just making sure we're all on the same page moving forward, what our priorities are, and where the county can really support in terms of drought condition, or just being transparent about what solutions are working on the east side of the county or north part of our eastern Summit County versus south. And yeah, so just talking to each other, I think, is really where it starts.
Awesome. Yeah, it's glad to see that. And I'm glad to see that emphasis for both of your communities, like being really transparent and collaborative. It's a really great way to move in this space with water in particular. And Hailey, what role is the state planning to have with water elements general plans moving forward? Will there be any more assistance available to cities and counties as they implement those plans?
Yeah, so currently all of our technical assistance has been funded, and there was no further appropriations from the legislature for funding related to water and land planning this year. I'm hoping after our water use and preservation program report is published, some of those recommendations I do think will involve increased funding for this, especially scenario planning. So I will keep everyone aware of that, and hoping to coordinate more with the AOGs and other kind of planning networks to get that word out. What else? Moving forward, we're doing a lot of planning that's not necessarily related to land use planning. We do have the state water plan that is in draft. That will go to public comment in a couple of months, I believe. and that should be adopted by the end of this year. So that's kind of a big planning task at the moment.
Great. Glad to hear that there's some support continuing potentially down the line. Interested in knowing, beyond the SB 110 requirement, was there anything else that motivated Melinda and Megan, your motivation in participating to create this water element for your community? Melinda, you shared with us that your experience in Pleasant View showed you kind of the reality of what happens when you don't plan for these things ahead of time. Is there anything else you want to add on that? And then Megan, is there anything that motivated you beyond the requirement?
Yeah, so I'll just real quickly, when I was in Pleasant View, Valerie Clausen was our community development director. She does some consulting work right now too, but she would be a great resource to reach out to. Bill Kobabe is in the audience. He worked in Pleasant View City. So the Adequate Public Facilities Ordinance was a precursor to a rezone application. And essentially somebody would submit an application that said, this is what we want to do. We would do an analysis to make sure that we had those utilities or water available. And if we didn't, there was no rezone application. It kind of dead-ended there. So I will tell you that that was a very stressful place to live in for a number of years, to try and get water into the system. Especially our water superintendent, you know, at one point we had a well house that had been hit by lightning and the pump had blown. We had a well that failed turbidity, and we were also rehabbing a well. And so we were in really like a precarious position with not having enough water. And that is not something I would recommend. You know, you talked about trucking water in. That's just like, I feel like this really is very important to consider as we look at future land use, but what can we do currently? And one of the things that I think should be alarming is what's happening with Great Salt Lake. And so the more we can do within our communities, especially if, you know, we're in Davis County, that feeds into the lake, the more we can do to ensure that that lake can get the water levels that are needed for us to be living happy and sustainably is important. So this is something that just really is more, it's bigger than just one city, one county, it's all of us, and looking towards just making sure that those developments that we bring in and approve are done responsibly.
So because I sit in the sustainability division, our work is guided by our council's sustainability and climate action goals. And when I started with the county 2 years ago, though that resolution had been adopted in 2019, and there was really no mention of water, even though, you know, I guess it was a missed opportunity to recognize the intersection between climate and water and our role that we could play. And so when we first heard of the water element, our division, we kind of forced our way into the conversation as an opportunity for us. We knew that we were going to be going back to our council in early 2026 to adopt a refreshed resolution, and we really wanted water to be a part of that. And so my engagement in the water element really helped kind of shape what we wanted that water goal to be. And essentially now it just says that the sustainability division will play a role in implementing the water element. But yeah, from the very beginning, it was clear that sustainability wanted to be a part of this project.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank all of you three for your great participation today. We're coming up on the end of time, but I just wanted to turn it back to you all in the room since we've got big full house full of experience. Just a show of hands. Who in the room has been involved in putting together your water element in your general plan because of this requirement? Great. Yeah, it's a lot of you in the room. We have 2 minutes left, but I wanted to see if anyone of you wanted to share anything about your process being involved in implementing the water element in your general plan. And I can run a mic to you if you have anything to share. right. We're the only ones up here excited about this, but we're really happy that you joined us today. Thank you so much for your attention, and see you around.